Well, Clara, welcome to Upstanders. Thank you so much for joining us. Um, I would like to begin asking you because we know you are a lawyer and you have worked in cases related to reproductive rights.
Yeah.
Uh, I think this is a very important topic, not only in the US but also here in Mexico. Here in Mexico, we have the Supreme Court has protected that right for women. So I would like to ask you how your journey in law and in this topic began, how you're interested in that began.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me and hosting me on your podcast, and for this question and for the conversation we're about to have. When it comes to how I came to be passionate about reproductive rights and why I chose to really make that my field in the legal profession, honestly, it came sort of as a surprise. I began law school in the fall of 2014, when Roe v. Wade was still good law in the United States, and when, the federal protections for abortion were pretty robust still. And I grew up in a state in New York where protections for reproductive rights were pretty good. And I went to college also in a state, Illinois, that had pretty robust protections as well. And so, to be honest with you, I didn't understand. I didn't know how different things were across the country depending on what state you were in. Because even when there was still a federal protection to the right to an abortion, many states had legal regimes where they were teetering on the edge of that, and they were doing things to try and chip away at that right. And so living in one state could be a very different experience for a pregnant person than living in another state. And I really only began to learn about that when I went to law school and I was meeting other law students who were passionate about this issue. And in my constitutional law course and other courses that touch on this issue, like family law, for example, I realized how dire the situation was in some states. And it was also becoming increasingly clear that there was a real threat to the federal constitutional right for an abortion. And so it was during that time and during that time of real education while I was in law school that I decided that this was really what I wanted to devote my career to, was protecting this right, expanding it where possible, and really sort of lifting up the voices and experiences of women and other marginalized communities in the United States.
Wow, really interesting.
Yes, in Mexico, this Mexican Supreme Court recently depenalized abortion as a crime in all the country, but it has a specific effect. So when we were making these questions for you, we saw that you really had a trajectory defending women's rights. So I would like to ask you, why is it important for you to fight for women's rights and equality, just like Justice Ginsburg did?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that my grandmother, Justice Ginsburg, really, when she was an advocate before she was a judge and then a justice, her principal area of advocacy was in women's rights and addressing gender discrimination. And she did an incredible job. And I would not have the life that I have had it not been for her work, as well as the work of people who came before and after her. But the job wasn't done. And she would be the first to say that there were still problems in American society and in American law. And so as long as women and others are facing discrimination and are facing unjust treatment in society and treatment that is appropriate under the law, there is still work to be done. And so for me, it was important, not just in terms of carrying on her legacy, but to improve my life and the life of my contemporaries and also the lives of our children and grandchildren to continue this work. And it looks different now in some ways than it did in the 1970s when my grandmother was an advocate, but in many ways, it's also very similar.
Yeah. Yeah, and talking about that, I remember the documentary about RBG when you talked about you were just graduating from law school and you were explaining to her that it was the first generation where it was equally composed or where
Yeah.
they were half man and half women and they achieved gender equality. And I think that's really interesting because here in Mexico, at least in law school, most of law students are women. And
Mm,
statistically, there are more women being lawyers, but something that it's really sad to see is that there are really few women in positions of leadership.
mhm.
What do you think what this tells us about our societies, and why it should be important to make remarks about that and to take into account that when we are selecting or trying to find leadership and positions of leadership?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, that it's so important. And one thing to point out is that, I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2017, and that was, as you mentioned, the first class that was equal women and equal men. But in the legal profession and in law schools, women have outnumbered men now for a long time, but it's in these elite spaces like Harvard Law School, or as you say, in leadership positions later on, where that's not reflected. And so, what is happening at the top, right? What is happening either at the elite schools or what is happening in the positions of power, whether that's in private practice or the public sector, that women and to be sure, minorities who are even less represented in the legal profession are making their way to the top. And I think it is a sort of a longer road because there are so many difficulties from the moment you graduate law school to having a 20, 30, 40-year career where you can really achieve in those top positions. And there's lots that has to be done beyond just admitting folks to law school. There are structures that have to change. There are certain policies that need to be put in place at these, whether it's a law firm or whether it's a government office or a public interest office, that will help women and other people who have historically have not been represented at the top to get there and to stay there.
Of course.
And I would like to ask you, in this specific topic and in this, as lawyers, why do representation matters? In Mexico, the model of a lawyer, it's a white heterosexual man that in Mexico dresses really in a very specific way, like suits, something like Harvey Specter in some way. So why does representation matter, and why it is important to show other ways to be and to be a lawyer
Right.
and to represent your identity?
Well, I think you've answered your own question. Representation is so important because if people don't see people who look like them, who have similar lived experiences as them in positions that they're interested in, they're going to assume that, that's not a position for them and that they won't be welcome in those spaces. And of course, someone has to be the first, right? When it's been all men, someone has to be the first woman. When it's all white people, someone has to be the first racial minority, of course. But then, having those people there is so important for the newer generations. I mean, not even people who are even lawyers yet, but who are thinking about whether they want to go to law school and be lawyers. If they don't see anyone who has shared and common experiences with them, they're going to assume that it's a profession that is not going to welcome them, or that's going to make it very difficult for them to reach the pinnacle of where they want to go.
Well, that's really interesting. And actually, for example, here in Mexico, we have this case of Jesus Baena. Perhaps you read about it in the news. They was the first non-binary judge in Mexico and in Latin America, and they murdered Ociel some months ago because of their identity. It was this person who you could think that they was a man, but they used to wear clothes from that are typically for women, and he had like a different way of express themselves, and it was really something that caused a lot of violence towards him. So I think that that's really important. And he was a leader figure for many people and for non-binary people and in the law field. So I think it's really important what you said about representation.
Yeah.
But moving on, I would like to ask about your experience as a judicial clerk, because you were also a judicial clerk. How was that experience, and what was the most important lesson or experience that you have from that? And did you receive any advice from your grandmother, Justice Ginsburg?
Yeah, so I was a judicial clerk in the federal courts here in New York. So for 1 year, I worked as a judicial clerk on the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York, which is the federal trial court here in New York. And then another year, I clerked for the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. So that's the appellate court, the intermediary court, and also the Second Circuit, which is based here in New York. And those were two really incredible experiences. And I think in many ways, it is the very best way for a young attorney to really see how courts work, how a legal case is created. At the district court, at the trial court, we saw cases from the day they were filed all the way, through trial and all of the steps in between. And then, of course, at the appellate court, I saw many appeals of different types of cases, different subject matters, criminal, civil, dealing with everything from, the alleged appropriation of art to contract disputes to sort of so many different things. And so I think it's an incredible experience for someone who's just getting started as an attorney, who wants to see how litigation works and also wants to see a wide variety of issues being litigated. And so I had a lot of fun, and I was very lucky to clerk for two amazing judges who are just brilliant people who were able to teach me and my co-clerks so much about what it means to think really thoughtfully about the law and what it means to do justice, and to, and take their jobs very, very seriously. When it comes to whether my grandmother gave me any advice, she did, and I won't impart all of it, but I would say that the most important thing she told me was just that you have to read everything, and you have to read everything really carefully. And so she was not someone who was supportive of cutting corners or, not doing your real diligence. And I think that goes to the, to the issue of wanting to do the right thing for the parties. And it is your responsibility as a judge to know everything about the record and to really look at each, you might have 20 cases on your desk, but for the parties involved, they have one, and that is the most important thing to them. And so, taking care and, really taking each and every case really seriously is so important.
Wow. I'm curious because, for example, I work for the private sector. I work at a law firm, but Avril works in the public sector in the Supreme Court. How different it is to work as a law clerk in the judicial, but also go into the private sector and being an attorney. How was your experience dealing with that? And how different it is. And I'm doing this question for students who perhaps are curious or are insecure about going one way or another.
Yeah. Well, in the United States, most law clerks, it is just a 1 or 2 year position. And so they all eventually will leave and either go to private practice or government or public interest. And after my clerkships, I actually went to a public interest law firm, the American Civil Liberties Union, for a couple of years. And then eventually I came into private practice. But, actually, as of 2 weeks from now, I will be back in public interest full time. So I don't know when the podcast is going to air, but if it's after February 1st, I'll have a different job, and I'll be at the National Women's Law Center. And so, I think that clerkships really are a work experience that can be universally applied to any position in law, and also not just for litigators who know that they want to sort of be doing litigation and be in court, but even for corporate attorneys or IP attorneys, because it's just the skills that you learn beyond just seeing litigation from start to finish. The real skills you learn in terms of, having to review a record and review a docket really carefully and closely, having to work really closely with one person, right? So it's a judge, but if you're at a private firm, it might be a partner, for example, and also learning how to do things carefully, but also efficiently, because as a law clerk, you have to work quickly, but you can't cut corners and you have to get things right. And that is the kind of skill building that will be helpful no matter your practice after you're done.
Well, congratulations for your new position.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you, many students and many people deal with the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I myself deal with it. And I want to ask you first, have you experienced it? And if you have, what have you done to deal with it and to not let it like stop you from doing like this that you will do, that you will change your job? Many people don't do it because they are afraid that they will not get a job as good as like they have now. So what would you give some advice?
I don't know a single woman who has not experienced imposter syndrome at some point, whether it's in school or in their career. And I think it's a universal experience. And I think at some point you just have to look to your left and look to your right and know that you deserve to be in that room just as much as anybody else. And that depending on sort of your background and your position, you probably had to work harder to be in that room than some of the other people. And at the end of the day, the only thing that you can control is yourself and how hard you work and sort of what opportunities you create for yourself. And so imposter syndrome is a variant on comparing yourself to other people, and that almost will never put you, and you'll almost never, that will almost never be a recipe for success. And so at some point you just have to go with confidence in yourself and know that you have earned your position in that room, and it doesn't really matter if anybody thinks so or not, because you are in control only of yourself. And as long as you are doing the work and you are doing the best that you can, that's the best you can do.
Wow. I would like to go a little bit back about your experience in reproductive rights, because last year I had the honor to meet this Mexican Supreme Court Justice, Margarita Rios Farhat. She's a true champion for reproductive rights and for women's rights here in Mexico. And she talked about the importance of learning the stories of the people and being more humane as lawyers, because sometimes lawyers tend to go very in the technique, in the laws, doing what is only in the law. But
Yeah.
she talks about this humane part and taking into account the stories and why it is important. There are so many stories from women who are suffering, who want to take the decisions for their life and basically do their lives and have and respect their rights. So I would like to ask, in your experience, do you also think that it is important to take into account these stories, and why do you think it is important to still talk about this issue? Because I know in the US we had this Supreme Court decision that overruled Roe v. Wade,
Yeah.
and that it's making even more difficult for women to take abortion. So why do you think it is still important to take into account and to talk about this issue?
Yeah, thank you for this great question. And I think it's so important that we ground abortion in the lived experiences of the people who have had abortions, and also those who wanted an abortion and couldn't access them, and what that meant for their lives. Because as you know, you're completely right that law can sometimes feel removed from lived experience and from human beings, because it can sometimes feel like words on a page or something just so theoretical. And abortion care, like many other issues, is something that is integral to someone's livelihood, to their freedom, to their ability to be a parent to the children they already have, to be able to get the career that they want, and to also be able to be healthy. Many people seek abortions because their pregnancy is endangering their health. Most people who seek abortions are already parents and want to be able to parent their children with dignity and in the way that they want to. And if they had another child, they wouldn't be able to do that. And it's so important, I think, for judges and for politicians to hear the lives of real people who have had abortions. And it doesn't always have to be the horror stories of someone who, had they not had an abortion, would have suffered a horrible medical diagnosis or worse. Those are important stories, of course, but it's also important to hear the stories of the everyday abortion, of explaining why this is such an important right for people to be able to access. And it's only really in grounding the right and access in real human beings, I think, that judges and politicians sometimes can be convinced.
Yeah, that's really interesting because Justice Rios has a very beautiful and personal story that she shared with me, that when she was a young lawyer, she had a spontaneous abortion. She was pregnant and she wanted to be a mother, and she talked about how she wanted so much to become a mother, and there was nothing that would prohibit her to do that. But she had this unfortunate event, and she wanted to share it so other women from our country could know that even her could have that story, and it's something that could happen to anyone. And that is something so common, and that people see it sometimes as something that is like really dangerous, or like in a very I don't know how to explain it in English, but in a difficult way, or something that is beyond something normal. So she
Right.
wanted to do it, or to explain it for other women.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really important.
And it's such a brave thing for women to share their experiences, and because to say this very personal story, this story that was really horrible for me, something I went through that I hope no one else has to go through, to use that and to help other women is so brave and so important. And I also think stories like that are key, because there is often the perception that people who want abortion are they're not responsible, or they're not taking the idea of parenting seriously, and this is just some sort of this is so that they can live amoral and crazy lives. First of all, I would say that there's nothing wrong with that. And if that person wants an abortion, they should be able to get one. But secondly, I would say that that's not, the typical person who seeks abortion care. That is not the typical profile, right? The person who seeks an abortion is usually and often already a parent, or is someone who desperately does want to have children one day, but at this moment isn't the right time for whatever reason. And they are your neighbors, they are your sisters, they are your aunts, they are your mothers. And men probably don't realize that, a large number of the women that they know have had abortions. And if they ask about them, and if they actually seem interested in those experiences, they might be very surprised with the stories that they hear.
Of course, yeah.
In returning to the topic of lawyers and women, I would like to ask you, what advice do you give to all the young girls that want to be lawyers in the future?
Yeah, not many people have asked me, I'm going to be honest. And, I finished law school 7 years ago, so I haven't been practicing, for that long that I would have good advice to give. But I would say, practicing law is not always an easy profession. And so what makes it easier is working on issues that you care about. And I think my friends who are happiest are the friends who are excited about what they get to do every day and that they feel like they are advancing justice. And that can mean very different things for very different people. And those who are least fulfilled and least happy are those who are just going through the motions of a job because they feel like they have to and they haven't landed somewhere where they are really excited about what they're doing. And so I think if you can find a practice area, if you can find a subject matter that gets you excited, that is worth it for the long hours that all of us have to work, and the grueling nature of law, sometimes it makes it a lot easier and a lot more fun if it's something you actually care about.
Of course. Yeah. When we were doing the research, because we are huge fans of Justice Ginsburg,
Me
and
too.
we have watched we have watched the documentary so many times, and we have read the books. We actually interview Professor Amanda Tyler,
Yeah.
who worked with her and who wrote a book with her. And we've watched the videos and the images of you being a little girl in the oral hearings in the Senate, and when you are holding her hand, and it's really beautiful to see, and how you have become a judge and choosing this topic of reproductive rights. I think it's really worth of admiring for and for us law students, seeing that it's a beautiful story. So I remember that when she unfortunately died, you talked about her last wish, that
Hmm.
it was that she was not being replaced until the next election. But
Hmm.
I remember that many people took that like in a wrong way and criticized it, and it was really difficult. So I would like to ask, if you would like to answer, of course, how was that experience, because you were dealing with the loss of your, we have to remember that it was your family, it was your grandmother.
Yeah.
It was something really, really difficult, and I couldn't imagine being myself in that position, and also having to deal with accusations, and knowing that it was an important topic for the country. So I would like to ask, how was that experience? Was it difficult?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I mean, I think in many ways it was difficult, but to be honest, I sort of tuned out most of the news and commentary and was just really focused on my family and on sort of the immediate close community of friends, colleagues, and family of my grandmother's. And that even though I had helped make this sort of public statement on her behalf, my grief and my mourning was really a private matter. And so, I didn't really pay much attention to what was kind of going on externally, to be honest. And it was, I think at maybe a week or so after she passed, my husband asked me if I was feeling okay about something. And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And he was like, he had to tell me that apparently the then president of the United States had made a comment about what I had said on her behalf. And I truly had no idea because I just wasn't paying attention and frankly didn't really care what he had to say. And so on that issue. So I think, that this goes to show that I was sort of in my own little bubble with family and community.
Of course. So I think Ariel will make the last question. Yeah.
Right?
Yes. We would like to ask you, what was the biggest advice your grandmother gave to you?
Yeah. I mean, there were so many pieces of advice she gave me through the years. I'll give you one that was a very practical piece of advice that I hope will help the students who might be listening to the podcast, and maybe other young attorneys. The thing she told me was, when you're done with a class or you're done with a meeting and you are taking notes, always take the 5 minutes that you need after the class is done and after the meeting is done to reread those notes right then and there, because doing that and rereading them on the spot will cement the the distillation of the topic, which you have in your notes, will cement that into your brain. And it seems like such a silly little piece of advice, but I have to tell you that when I do it, I remember what was discussed in that class or in that meeting so much more than anytime I don't do it. And my grandmother had an incredible memory. You know, I could ask her things and she would, you know, she could tell you, you know, who sang what opera in 1982 when she saw it, or she could tell you who argued a case before her in 1998. And so any tricks that she could teach me for helping get that kind of memory, I took to heart. And that one I think was a really helpful and practical one, which can be universally applied by your listeners.
Wow. Yeah, I will start to do that next semester.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for doing this interview. It has been really, really interesting. Here in Mexico, grandmothers are a very important part of our lives. And
Mhm.
something that I said like as a joke is that Justice Ginsburg is somehow the grandmother of the law students who are dealing with a lot of things and trying to learn and trying to do more, not only for the country but for everyone, and to do better things. And that's the thing. That's the theme of the podcast, Upstanders. An upstander is someone that raises their voice and that says something when there is an injustice or something is not right. So I think you truly qualify when I said that you are an upstander. So thank you very much for doing this.
I so appreciate it. Thank you both for your time and good luck with everything you have on your plates in the near and distant future. And it really is really beautiful to hear that about my grandmother and how much she is appreciated in Mexico. I think that's really incredible. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I think Avril wanted to show you because she does stickers for of justices in Mexico, but she made stickers of Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I'd love to see it.
The
Here
Wow.
are the,
oh, I think they're
let me, a moment.
I know she has become like an icon in the United States, and there's a lot of merch in there, but
Yeah, no,
here in
those are
Mexico.
beautiful. Wow. Yeah, that's gorgeous. I love them.
Yeah, so I think we will publish this episode next week on Tuesday.
Great.
So I will share it with you. And I would like to ask if you could share with us a picture of you so we can use it in the cover.
I
If
think
that's
if you can just if you look at my law firm bio on the Wilmer Hale website, you can
okay.
use that picture.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, perfect. I will use that. And finally, I will share it with you. So thank you very much. Oh, perfect. I have it now.
Great.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and
Thank
an
you.
honor. Thank you very much for
And I
everything.
Thank
love the
you.
book in the background. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I noticed it.
Yeah, yeah. Avril has the other one of Notorious RBG.
Yeah.
The which we also interviewed Shannon Ishnik. I don't
Yes,
know
I
if you
saw.
if you
That's
know her.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Ay, yo sigo